Dana White's Contender Series. This is Season 8, Episode 4. We have 5 fights lined up for this Tuesday night. I'm John Kelly. Let's hear the picks. We're going to kick things off in the lightweight division as Quillen Salkilld is a minus 218 favorite currently. The comeback on Gage Young is plus 180. And we'll start on the Salkilld side. This guy's a 6-1 prospect. He's the former lightweight champion over in Eternal MMA, and he's a training partner of Cody Haddon, who we saw on week 2 deliver with that round 1 knockout. Now, he seems to be kind of a size bully. He's very long for the division, 6 feet tall, and he kind of uses his size to bully his opponents. On the feet, he has some powerful leg kicks, but he is sloppy. He leaves himself open to being counters. Now, what he's been able to do is close distance, rely on that wrestling, rely on that ground game. The solid submission grappler, holds a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, I will say this, obviously, you guys know some black belts mean more than others. This is one, it's not complete Fugazi to me, but it's definitely, like, his grappling's decent, don't get me wrong. But if you look back, the progression of belts for him came very, very fast. It was like 1 year, blue belt to purple belt, 14 months, purple belt to brown belt, 15 months, brown belt to black. It was very quick. And you can even see that in his Instagram photos. So I'll just point that out there. A lot of the competition that he faced over an Australian regional scene was not the greatest. So, of course, his grappling was good enough against those guys. And I think it's actually going to be good enough here against Gage Young, who's an 8-1 prospect fighting out of Missouri. This guy previously trained with James Krause over at Glory MMA, the former Glory MMA, but he seems to be a pretty solid striker, comes from a Muay Thai background, and he uses those teep kicks a lot, and he does have power in his hands. When he's able to close distance, he has a big, powerful 1-2 that he's been able to hurt a couple opponents with. He has 4 round 1 knockout victories. Now, similar to Salkilld, his level of competition really hasn't been there. And honestly, I don't think his defensive grappling is all that great. So this is one where I do think we're going to see a finish here because Gage Young likes to move forward and he does have power. And we know that Salkilld can be clipped. But on the flip side, Salkilld, very big and physical, has power of his own, and is going to force the grappling where I think he could potentially find a finish as well. So it's one where I could see an argument for both sides. I'm going to lean towards the favorite here in Salkilld. I think the grappling is going to be the difference. We'll say Salkilld by submission. That's the official pick, and he's going to kick things off in the DGen parlay. And next fight up, we're going to head to the women's flyweight division as we have a massive favorite in Shannon Clark, minus 540. The comeback on Unessi Duben is plus 360. And we'll start on the Clark side. She's the current LFA flyweight champion, and she fights out of the southpaw stance, but her striking, honestly, is not very good. What she's very good at is closing distance, using her physicality. She's very physically strong for the division, and I've referred to her as a Walmart version of Holly Holm because that's the exact style she's going to bring. You know, on the feet, she's got some nasty leg kicks, but like I said, not super comfortable striking, not nearly to the degree that Holly Holm is, but where she reminds me of Holm is that cage control, everybody's favorite, very entertaining style. She's very good at holding her opponents up against the cage, but she's also very physically dominant in the clinch. She's nasty knees in the clinch, constantly working there. She's able to control her opponents and really beat them up in the clinch. And I think that's going to be the difference here because she's facing someone in Duben who's entirely unproven. She's a 5-0 undefeated prospect. She comes from a high-level Taekwondo and Wushu background. But get this, every single fighter she's faced in her professional career had an 0-0 record. So it's like you can't even take away much from that. She seems to have a solid striking skill set, and I think she is going to be the better pure striker here. But honestly, I just don't think it's going to matter because I don't think it's going to take long for Clark to close distance, get inside where she needs to be, and really just beat Duben up in the clinch and eventually get her hand raised here. We'll say it's Clark by decision. That's the official pick. And next up in the featherweight division, we have Austin Bashi, a minus 540 favorite. The comeback on Dorian Ramos is plus 360. And we have another massive favorite here, but this time I think it's warranted because Austin Bashi, for my money, is one of the more exciting prospects on this entire season. So I'm expecting him to deliver in this type of softball matchup. Now, originally, he was supposed to face Tommy McMillan, who's much bigger than him because that's the one thing about Bashi. The one knock on him is he's very short for the division. He's a short king at only 5'4", and that was a much tougher matchup against McMillan, but McMillan pulled out, so now we're getting Dorian Ramos on very short notice, and honestly, I think this is all Bashi here. Bashi is just, people call him a mega prospect. This kid is very high level. Wherever the fight goes, he comes from a high level wrestling and grappling background, holds a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but the striking is developing as well. He's got nasty leg kicks. He's got power in his hands too. He just seems to be the real deal, at least in terms of this stage. Now, he's somebody that the UFC actually had their eye on years ago and was trying to bring him under the fold, so to speak, earlier. And he said, nah, I want to get the experience. I'm going to go to the regional scene. And he's faced some pretty stiff competition, relatively speaking, on the regional scene. And he's looked great doing so. He's got 12-0 undefeated record. He previously just fought Askar, who's a well-known regional fighter, ended up submitting him as well. And honestly, I just think that's what's going to happen here against Dorian Ramos, who's an 8-2 fighter. I mentioned the short notice nature. He's fighting out of Arizona and basically hasn't really fought anyone on the regional scene. But the one thing about him is he brings a very exciting style. He wants to move forward, swing recklessly, and really just get down to business here. Now, the issue with him is, I mentioned the level of competition. I think Bashi's going to be the best fighter and the best grappler that he's faced yet. And I also think, looking at him on the regional scene, this dude put himself in bad spots in grappling exchanges multiple times, and he has been submitted on the regional scene as well. So now, if you're going to do that against somebody as high level as Bashi, who I expect to be able to get the takedowns, who's going to have a massive grappling edge, I think he's probably going to sleep here. We're going to say it's Bashi by submission. That's the official pick, and he's going to keep things rolling in the DGen parlay. Which brings us to our middleweight matchup between Will Currie and Jordan Ribeiro dos Santos. We'll start on the Currie side. He's currently a minus 425 favorite. The comeback on dos Santos is plus 300. Will Currie is a 12-3 prospect fighting out of England. He previously fought over in Cage Warriors, and of his 3 professional losses, 2 of them came against Christian Leroy Duncan, who's currently a UFC fighter, making a name for himself in the middleweight division. And the other loss was arguably a robbery decision for the Cage Warriors title. So he's definitely pretty well tested in terms of, the level of competition, but also the fact that he's gone 5 rounds before he's fought for the Cage Warriors title. You like to see that. In terms of his skill set on the feet, he's got some very powerful leg kicks, and he wants to kind of be at range. He wants to keep distance, blast those body kicks, does have a little bit of power in his hands as well, but he's another one of those guys that's leaned on his ground game. When he goes to the wrestling, he kind of just mauls guys in the grappling, and it's not just because his grappling's all that high level, but as you guys know, over in Cage Warriors, a lot of times, people just really can't grapple. So even though he kind of makes mistakes at times in the wrestling and the grappling, it hasn't really hurt him all that much yet. But I think once he starts to face better grapplers, he's going to need to clean some of that stuff up. The last thing I'll say about him is the cardio is honestly not very good. Every time we saw him get extended, he definitely slowed down, and he's not a high volume guy to begin with. And even multiple fights, the announcers talk about it. Like, he's typically a quick finisher. We know he's going to start slowing down now. So the cardio is a known issue for him. Now, on the flip side, Jordan Ribeiro dos Santos is a 9-1 prospect fighting out of Brazil. He's currently a training partner of the Bonfim brothers, who both won a contract on Contender Series previously, so you love to see that. He's also one of those guys that early on in his career, like he has that Brian Battle prototype where early on in their careers, they were kind of fluffy, didn't look like the typical UFC jack shredded 8-pack fighter, and then now he's starting to really look a lot better physically, and it's showing inside the octagon as well. He's the Thunder middleweight champion on the regional scene, and he's somebody who I think he might be a better pure boxer if you take away the leg kicks, and he has a little bit of leg kicking game as well, but just purely the hands, I think they're better than Will Currie. The only thing is defensively, he kind of leaves himself open to being countered because he doesn't keep a very high guard, but he also leans on the wrestling and the grappling. This dude's a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and his wrestling is pretty solid as well. So this is one where I think the line is pretty wide here because Will Currie has been finished on the regional scene. He doesn't have great cardio. He's not a high volume guy, and he's kind of relied on his wrestling. And again, once we see these cage warrior wrestlers come over to the UFC, it usually doesn't translate that well. Now he's facing somebody who has solid wrestling, who has a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and has pretty solid hands as well. And I already mentioned the cardio being a concern on the Currie side. At minus 425, I think it's way too much respect here. And the last thing I'll say about Dos Santos is he's been off since November of 2022. So there's a little bit of added variance of what version is going to show up here. And at plus 300 range, I'm willing to take the shot that this version looks pretty solid. In terms of physically, he looks to be in good shape as well. Keep an eye on weigh-ins. I think plus 300 is a little bit crazy. He's going to be the dog shot this week, and we're going to say Dos Santos gets it done by decision, and he's going to be the underdog in the DGen parlay. Which brings us to our main event, as Igor Cavalcanti is a minus 310 favorite. The comeback on Ko Hyun is plus 250, and we'll start on the Cavalcanti side. This is a guy who's a 9-0 undefeated prospect fighting out of Brazil. All 9 of his professional wins have come inside the first round. He's actually only fought past the 2.5-minute mark of the first round just twice in his career. This dude wastes absolutely no time in getting after it. Now, he does have very limited footage available. I was only able to find a couple fights out there. He seems to have a very aggressive style. He'll swing crazy on the feet to try to take your head off, but his best asset is his grappling. He comes from a high-level grappling background, holds a brown belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I think that's going to be the biggest advantage in this fight against Ko, who's a 10-2 prospect fighting out of South Korea. Now, he's primarily a striker. A lot of those wins have come by knockout, and he fights out of the southpaw stance. He's got good footwork, bouncing in and out on his feet. He's got a powerful 1-2, and he will look to blast his leg kicks repeatedly as well. Now, he can be countered. He can be clipped. We've actually seen him knocked out twice on the regional scene, and honestly, I don't think his defensive grappling is all that great. He wasn't tested much on the regional scene in terms of the competition, but also in the grappling realm, and I think that's going to be the difference here. Yes, he can potentially hurt Cavalcanti on the feet, but I think eventually, early on, they're going to end up tangling in terms of the grappling, and I think that's going to be where the biggest edge is. So minus 310, a little bit dicey considering all the question marks on the Cavalcanti side, but I do think the grappling is going to be enough, and we'll say it's Cavalcanti by submission, and he's going to round things out in the DGen parlay. So to recap for the DGen parlay, in the first fight of the night, we're going with my guy Quillen Salkilld. I think the grappling's going to be enough. That's going to be the difference maker over Gage Young. I just don't trust his defensive grappling, and I think Salkilld could end up getting the submission there. In the second fight, heavy favorite. I don't think Shannon Clark is very good, but I think the physicality and hardware gap here is going to be noticeable. She dominates the clinch, controls her along the fence, and gets her hand raised. In the third fight, we're going with the big favorite, the mega prospect in Austin Bashi. I'm excited to see what this kid has at the UFC level. I think he gets a finish here and gets the contract. In the fourth fight, the one underdog shot I'm taking here is D. Jordan Ribeiro dos Santos. I just don't trust Will Currie at minus 425 here. I think there's enough holes to poke in it to where Dos Santos looks like a very live dog in this type of matchup. In the final fight, the main event, a lot of uncertainty around the big favorite here in Igor Cavalcanti, but I think the grappling edge is going to be enough here to where he gets that first round finish and gets a contract as well. 5 fights, guys. Expecting a lot of violence this week, which is always exciting. As always, appreciate you guys watching. Best of luck, and we'll see you next week.